"What's a weak little human like you doing here?" The words cut through the silent classroom, followed by a wave of muffled laughter. Xyra, a top student at the Intergalactic Academy, smirked as she leaned back in her seat. She wasn't trying to be cruel. Well, maybe just a little. It was just funny to her. A human in this academy? The idea was ridiculous. The academy was the most prestigious institution in the known galaxy, reserved for the best and brightest from the most powerful species. The Vorlex, like Xyra's kind, were dominant, physically superior, intellectually advanced, and descendants of a warrior lineage that had conquered countless worlds. Compared to them, humans were nothing more than an insignificant, fragile species, barely capable of surviving their own planet's harsh conditions, let alone standing among the galaxy's elite. And yet here he was, sitting quietly, his expression unreadable. Was Jace the only human in the academy? He had no impressive physique, no special abilities, nothing that made him look remotely intimidating. Xyra had seen him in class for weeks, always quiet, always avoiding attention. If he felt insulted by her words, he didn't show it. That annoyed her. "Did you hear me, human?" she pressed. "You can speak, right?" The professor, an elder of a reptilian species, shifted uncomfortably at the confrontation, but didn't intervene. That was odd. The academy had strict rules against harassment, and yet, for some reason, no one ever stuck up for Jace. It was almost like they were afraid to. Then, for the first time, Jace looked up. His eyes locked onto Xyra's, and for the briefest moment, she felt something strange, an instinctual sense of danger. It wasn't his size or his posture. It was something in his gaze. Then he smirked. "I heard you," he said, his voice calm. "But tell me something. If humans are so weak, why are you so nervous right now?" Xyra frowned. She wasn't nervous, was she? Something about this human was off, and she was about to find out why. The Intergalactic Academy was the pinnacle of higher learning, a place where the best and brightest from the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy came to sharpen their minds and prepare for leadership roles. It was a place for elites, warriors, and intellectuals, a stepping stone to positions of power across countless worlds. And among them, there was one human. Jace had been attending for several weeks, yet no one really knew why he was there. Humans were barely acknowledged as a relevant species in the galactic order. In fact, most students had never even met one before. They had read about Earth in history archives, but as far as they were concerned, it was a low-tier, primitive world, barely capable of space travel. Certainly not the kind of place that produced students worthy of an institution like this. Yet here he was, and that, more than anything, bothered Xyra. She wasn't cruel for the sake of being cruel. She simply believed in superiority, that the strongest, smartest, and most evolved species naturally rose to the top, while the weak were left behind. That was the order of things. And Jace? He didn't fit into that order. The Vorlex, her species, were considered one of the galaxy's dominant powers. They had conquered worlds, built vast empires, and stood unchallenged for centuries. Xyra herself had been born into status, strength, and privilege. She had trained in advanced combat since she could walk, her body and mind refined to near perfection. So when she saw Jace sitting there, silent, unmoving, as if he belonged, it irritated her. She had watched him. He never reacted, never retaliated when others looked down on him. It wasn't the reaction of someone confident. It was the reaction of someone hiding something. Her mockery wasn't just casual arrogance. It was a test. She wanted to see if Jace would break, if he would snap, if he would finally admit what everyone already assumed, that he didn't belong here. But instead, he had smirked at her. And for the first time, she felt doubt creep in. The professor, usually quick to shut down student conflicts, had remained silent. In fact, now that she thought about it, none of the faculty ever directly questioned Jace's presence. Almost like they were avoiding the subject entirely. Why? Xyra wasn't sure, but one thing was clear. This human wasn't normal. And if there was one thing she couldn't stand, it was a mystery she didn't understand. That meant only one thing. She had to push harder. She had to force him to reveal his weakness. And she had just the perfect way to do it. Xyra couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about Jace. He wasn't reacting the way he should. Any other lower species student would have either snapped back in anger or cowered under the pressure. But Jace? He was too calm, too controlled. That smirk of his made her blood boil. Fine. If words wouldn't work, then she'd make him prove how weak he was. "All right, human," Xyra said, standing up from her seat. "Since you seem so confident, let's test that." The classroom grew silent. A challenge at the academy wasn't just a verbal dispute. It was a formalized trial of skill and intellect, a way for students to establish dominance. These trials were used to determine hierarchy, and there was no greater humiliation than losing in front of your peers. Jace raised an eyebrow, amused. A test. Xyra's voice was smooth, but her eyes glinted with something dangerous. A combat simulation. You and me. A murmur spread through the class. Was she serious? A Vorlex challenging a human to combat? That wasn't a fight, it was an execution. Xyra's species was known for their genetic enhancements, their superior reflexes and physical prowess. A single Vorlex warrior could overpower 10 trained soldiers from weaker species. Jace? He was barely taller than an average alien student, and his frame, while not scrawny, lacked the hulking physique of true warriors. The odds were so laughable. The class almost didn't know whether to cheer or feel sorry for him. Jace tilted his head, studying her. For a brief second, Xyra saw something flicker in his expression, something that sent an uncomfortable chill down her spine. Then he leaned back and smirked again. "All right," Jace said, voice casual. "I accept." The room erupted in whispers. Xyra wasn't sure why, but her stomach twisted at his complete lack of hesitation. No resistance, no fear, just calm acceptance. She clenched her jaw. Fine. Let him pretend to be brave. Because when this was over, when he was lying defeated in front of everyone, there would be no more hiding. She'd make sure of it. The simulation room was set up like a battleground, empty, cold, and stark, with holographic simulations of alien terrain and structures around them. It was designed to test physical and mental strength under pressure, where students could engage in realistic combat scenarios without anyone getting hurt. Jace and Xyra stood facing each other, surrounded by the hum of the simulation grid. The tension in the room was palpable, and Xyra felt her heart rate pick up, though she tried not to show it. The entire class had gathered around the perimeter, eagerly watching. This would be over quickly, she thought. A human fighting a Vorlex? It was practically a joke. Xyra cracked her knuckles, the faint sound echoing in the silence. She could feel the familiar hum of her genetic enhancements activating, readying her body for the fight. Her reflexes would be near perfect, her strength overwhelming, and her combat style flawless. Jace, on the other hand, had no special abilities, no physical advantages. He was a human, as fragile and predictable as any species Xyra had ever encountered. The simulation began with a loud buzz, and immediately, the terrain shifted to an urban battleground, a city under siege. Xyra moved first, her movements fluid and precise. She charged toward Jace, her feet barely touching the ground as she closed the distance between them. Jace didn't flinch. Instead of retreating or trying to dodge, he simply stood still, almost too still, like he wasn't even worried about the speed of her attack. Xyra's eyes narrowed as she reached him in a flash, aiming a swift punch at his midsection. With a graceful sidestep, Jace evaded the blow, his body moving in a way that seemed unnaturally smooth, almost effortless. Xyra's fist met nothing but air, and the force of her strike sent a shockwave through the ground beneath them. She turned quickly, ready to strike again, but this time, Jace was already on the move. In one fluid motion, he ducked under her next punch, grabbing her arm, and used her momentum to spin her around. The move was so precise, so well-timed, it almost felt like he was expecting her every move. Xyra's balance faltered as she tried to regain control, but Jace's grip was unshakable. A stunned silence fell over the class. Xyra, still struggling to regain her stance, couldn't help but feel something was off. Jace wasn't just dodging her attacks, he was moving in perfect harmony with her. He wasn't relying on sheer strength like she had expected. Instead, he seemed to be using timing, anticipation, and control, a style of combat she hadn't expected from a human. With a quick twist, she broke free, launching herself backward to put some space between them. "You're good," she admitted, her voice edged with irritation. But she wasn't worried. She had the advantage in pure strength and speed. "Thanks," Jace said coolly, not even out of breath. "I've had practice." Xyra gritted her teeth and charged again. This time, she was more cautious, but no less aggressive. She went for an overhead strike, aiming to bring her strength down on him like a hammer. But once again, Jace didn't retreat. Instead, he sidestepped and grabbed her wrist mid-strike. Before she could react, he twisted her arm and used his body to pin her into a hold. She was immobilized for a moment, her body pressed against his, both of them now on the ground. Jace, his face inches from hers, spoke with an odd calmness. "You're strong, but strength isn't always the answer." Xyra's eyes widened in disbelief. How had he done that? There was no possible way he could have overpowered her, not in a physical sense. Yet he had. It was then that the realization hit her. Jace wasn't just relying on his human limitations. He was leveraging his understanding of combat in a way that no one had expected. He wasn't merely dodging. He was reading her, anticipating her every move, using the smallest opening to his advantage. Xyra pushed against him, using every ounce of her enhanced strength to break free, but Jace was already rolling away, flipping back onto his feet. He wasn't even sweating. He was playing with her. The shock and frustration on Xyra's face were clear, and for the first time, she wasn't the one in control. She was the one trying to adapt, trying to counter his movements. But Jace was always one step ahead. The final moment came when, in one swift motion, Jace disarmed her, knocking her weapon from her hand. He stood over her, his posture calm and deliberate, but his eyes were filled with something far more dangerous than aggression: understanding. Xyra couldn't believe it. She had been bested. By a human. "Not bad, huh?" Jace said, offering a hand to help her up. For a long moment, Xyra just stared at him, disbelief coursing through her. This human, this seemingly insignificant being, had defeated her. The class, once silent, erupted in applause, but Xyra didn't hear it. She was too busy trying to process what had just happened. Jace wasn't just some weak, unremarkable human. He was dangerous, in a way that made him even more terrifying than she could have imagined. And now, she was beginning to realize that the humans were far more than just primitive beings. They had been hiding something all along. Something she had just barely scratched the surface of. Her respect for Jace and for humanity had just grown beyond what she could have ever imagined. The simulation room buzzed with energy as the class erupted into excited chatter, but all Xyra could hear was the pounding of her own heartbeat. She had just been defeated by a human. Jace stood a few feet away, casually adjusting his training gear, as if the fight hadn't been anything but another mundane exercise. His movements were calm, controlled, and still, he carried an air of unfathomable confidence that left Xyra utterly perplexed. The mockery had turned into something else entirely. A deeply unsettling realization that this human was not what he appeared to be. "Well, that was unexpected," one of the students murmured, still in shock. "Not bad for a human," another voice whispered, disbelief mixed with a hint of admiration. Xyra's thoughts, however, were racing. She had spent her entire life being told that Vorlex were the pinnacle of evolution. They were the strongest, the smartest, the most capable in the galaxy. No one, especially not a human, should have been able to match her in combat. Yet, there she was, lying defeated on the floor. Humiliated. "How?" "That's enough," the professor's voice cut through the noise, his tone surprisingly firm. "Everyone take your seats." Xyra didn't respond. She was still processing. She stared at Jace, his posture relaxed, his expression giving away nothing. That strange feeling of unease lingered, gnawing at the back of her mind. She had to know more. Why had he been so confident? Why hadn't he fought like a normal human would? As the class settled into their seats, Xyra found herself walking towards the professor. He was one of the few, who hadn't spoken during the challenge, and his reaction to the fight had been odd. He knew something. "Professor Verith," she called, her voice laced with frustration. "What just happened?" The professor's yellow eyes met hers with a gaze that was both knowing and wary. He said nothing for a long moment before speaking in a low voice. "Xyra, you've seen enough of the galaxy to understand that appearances can be deceiving." Xyra frowned. "What do you mean?" "You are not the first to underestimate him." Verith paused, then seemed to weigh his next words carefully. "Jace is not just any human. He is a descendant of an ancient human bloodline, one thought to have been erased from the records long ago." Xyra felt a sudden jolt in her chest. Ancient bloodline? What did that mean? The professor leaned in slightly, as if to emphasize his point. "Jace comes from Earth's forgotten history, a planet once home to the deadliest species the galaxy has ever known." "Deadliest species?" Xyra echoed. Her confusion deepened. "How can that be possible? Earth is a backwater planet. It's primitive." Professor Verith shook his head. "That is the lie the galaxy has been told for centuries. Earth was once considered a death world, a place where only the strongest could survive." Xyra stared at him in disbelief. "But humans are so weak. They barely even made it to space." "And that," Verith continued, "is exactly why the galaxy wiped their existence from history. Earth's true legacy was hidden, buried under layers of misinformation. The humans who ruled that planet were warriors, survivors of survival of the fittest, genetically designed to thrive in the harshest environments. The galaxy couldn't allow such a species to thrive." Xyra's mind was racing. "So, you're saying Jace is part of this bloodline? He's not normal." Verith sighed deeply. "No, he's not. Jace is the last of his kind, and the fact that he's here at this academy is no accident." Xyra couldn't process it. She had just fought a human and lost. A human who was not supposed to be anything more than a low-tier species. How was this even possible? "But why is he here?" Xyra asked, almost breathless. "Why would he come to a place like this, if he's from such an advanced bloodline?" Verith's eyes softened. "Jace comes here because he is a part of a larger mission. The galaxy needs to understand that humans are not to be underestimated. Earth is coming back into the fold." Xyra was stunned. "You mean to say humans have been hiding this power all along, and now they're coming back?" The professor gave her a grave look. "That is why Jace is here. He's not just a student. He's a reminder to everyone in the galaxy that humanity's legacy is far from over." The realization hit Xyra like a shockwave. The human she had mocked, the one she had thought was nothing more than a frail creature, was a living testament to an entire species of warriors. His presence at the academy was no accident. It was a statement. Jace wasn't weak. He was a living relic of Earth's forgotten legacy, and he was about to change the galaxy's perception of humans forever. Xyra turned to look at Jace across the room, her mind swirling with a mix of respect, confusion, and something else. Something more dangerous. She had just scratched the surface of his power. The real question was, what else was he capable of? And what would happen when the galaxy finally learned the truth about Earth? Xyra stood there, the weight of what she had just learned settling heavily on her shoulders. She had come to the academy with the belief that her species, Voralex, were the ultimate rulers of the galaxy. The strongest, the smartest, the most evolved. No one could challenge them. But now she was beginning to understand that the truth was far more complicated than she ever realized. Jace wasn't just some weak, insignificant human. He was part of a bloodline of warriors. Humans who had once ruled a planet known as a death world, where only the fittest could survive. A species that had once been feared, revered, and then wiped from history by those who feared what they could become. And yet, here he was, living proof that humanity's legacy was not something to be forgotten. Xyra felt a strange mixture of admiration and unease, the revelation gnawing at her. How had she missed this? She had spent so much time mocking him, so much energy convincing herself that humans were weak, that she hadn't stopped to consider what he might be hiding beneath that quiet, reserved exterior. She had seen him as nothing more than a primitive relic of a forgotten species, and yet he had just outclassed her in combat, effortlessly. He wasn't just skilled. He was dangerous in a way that was difficult to describe. It wasn't brute strength. It wasn't just intelligence. It was a primal awareness, a calm precision that made him more than a mere survivor. He was adaptable, constantly reading and anticipating his opponent's every move. Incredible. The truth hit her like a wave. Humans weren't just underestimated. They had been deliberately hidden away from the galaxy by those in power. The Vorakians, the Syrinx, the other dominant species, had known the threat humans posed and had chosen to bury it. And now, humanity was reclaiming its place among the stars. But what did this mean for Xyra? What did this mean for the Voralex? She had always believed that they were the pinnacle of civilization, that nothing could rival them. The idea that a species as insignificant as humans could one day stand at the same level, or even above them, was unthinkable. Xyra's mind raced. Could it be that the Voralex had missed their true rivals all along? That the threat to their dominance wasn't from outside, but from within? Could humans rise again and become a force strong enough to rival the galaxy's most powerful species? Could Jace and others like him be the key to that future? Xyra turned her gaze toward Jace, who was now sitting calmly in his seat, seemingly unaware of the shift in her perception. His confidence was unshakable, and for the first time, Xyra understood why. Jace was no mere human. He was the last of an ancient lineage, and his quiet strength spoke volumes. He wasn't here by accident. He was here to remind them all that humans weren't just a species to be disregarded. They were a species that had been hiding in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to reclaim their place in the galaxy. And Xyra? She had been foolish enough to think she could dismiss them. Her hands clenched into fists, a mix of frustration and respect growing within her. She had misjudged him, and in doing so had misjudged an entire species. Humanity was no longer something to be mocked. It was something to be reckoned with. And in that moment, Xyra knew one thing for certain. The galaxy was about to change, and humanity would be at the center of it. The question now was, what role would she play in that future? Would she stand in the way, or would she join Jace in whatever new era was about to unfold? She couldn't say yet. But one thing was for sure, she was no longer the same. Xyra's mind was still spinning as the realization of Jace's true identity settled in. She had mocked him, underestimated him, believing he was just another weak, insignificant human. Now, in the aftermath of their combat simulation, she was forced to confront a truth that had eluded her for so long. Humanity was far more than she ever imagined. But this wasn't just about Jace. This was about something far greater. The hidden, untold history of Earth, the Death World, and the legacy of a species that had once been a dominant force in the galaxy. Jace was a symbol of humanity's potential, but he was also a harbinger of a future that would shake the very foundations of galactic power. Xyra stood in the quiet corner of the Academy's observation deck, looking out at the stars. The vastness of space had always filled her with awe, a reminder of the Voralex's far-reaching influence. The Voralex Empire was powerful, untouchable, built on centuries of conquest and superiority. But the more she thought about it, the more the cracks began to show. For centuries, the galaxy had been shaped by a carefully constructed narrative, one that had hidden the truth about humanity's past. Earth, once a powerful, dangerous world, had been erased from history, and the humans that had once dominated the galaxy had been relegated to a forgotten backwater. And now, they were returning. Xyra couldn't ignore the implications. She was witnessing the birth of a new era, one where humanity was no longer a weak, irrelevant species. Jace, the lone human among the stars, was the first of many, the tip of the iceberg. The humans had spent centuries in isolation, hiding their strength and their true potential from the galaxy. But now, with Jace as a representative, humanity was poised to re-enter the galactic fold, not as a subjugated race, but as a force to be reckoned with. The problem was, no one in the galaxy was prepared for what was coming. Xyra had grown up hearing stories of galactic empires, of species that had risen and fallen through the ages. She had been taught that the Vorelex were the natural rulers of the galaxy, the strongest of all, with technology and military might that no one could challenge. But what if those stories were lies? What if the galaxy's true rulers had been buried beneath layers of misinformation, hidden by those who had feared their potential? Humanity had been forgotten, but now the veil was lifting. The Voraakians, a species that once ruled the galaxy with an iron fist, had been defeated by humans during their brief, hidden reign. The galaxy had erased Earth's existence, rewriting history to protect the powerful species who had feared the resurgence of humanity. The Vorelex, Xyra's own species, had participated in this suppression, dismissing humans as weak and primitive. But now, everything was changing. The problem, however, was that no one in the galaxy could agree on what to do about humanity's return. There were those who feared it, races that had long since subjugated weaker species or built their empires on the backs of others. These factions saw the rise of humans as a threat to their dominance, a disruption to the carefully balanced power structure of the galaxy. There were whispers of coalitions forming in the shadows, groups of alien leaders who had already begun to prepare for the inevitable conflict. They would not let humanity rise again without a fight. The fear of what humans could become, the fear of an untamed species capable of unimaginable power, was palpable. But there were others who saw potential in humanity. Xyra had already witnessed it in Jace, the drive, the ambition, and the incredible adaptability of the human race. There were civilizations across the galaxy, like the peaceful Syrinx, who were watching humanity's resurgence with hope rather than fear. They saw humans as a new ally, one that could unite the galaxy in ways that had never been possible before. The Syrinx were just one example of the many species that could potentially form alliances with humanity. The challenge now was how to navigate this growing tension. Could humanity rebuild their place in the galaxy without falling into the same patterns of oppression that had once dominated Earth? Would they seek peace, or would they rise as a new empire, bent on domination? Xyra didn't know, but one thing was certain: the galaxy had to change. The rise of humanity could be a turning point for the galaxy's future, and Xyra found herself caught in the middle of it all. The Vorelex, the once unchallenged rulers, now faced a future where they were no longer the only players in the game. Xyra's loyalty to her people was deep, but now, for the first time, she felt the stirrings of doubt. The Vorelex had ruled with an iron fist, but what if that wasn't the only way? What if humanity's hidden strength could be the key to breaking the cycle of conflict? As she stood there, staring into the vastness of space, Xyra realized that her world was about to change, just as much as Jace's. And it wasn't just about humanity anymore. It was about the future of the galaxy, and whether the species within it could find a way to live in balance, or if the rise of humanity would spark a war that would shake the stars themselves. The galaxy would never be the same again. As Xyra stood on the observation deck, gazing out at the stars, the enormity of the galaxy's transformation began to settle in. Everything she had known, everything her people had fought for, was now in question. The Vorelex, once unchallenged, now faced an uncertain future, one where humanity, once dismissed as insignificant, was on the cusp of reclaiming its rightful place in the galaxy. Xyra had always believed in the inherent superiority of her species, that the strongest and most evolved should rise to the top. But now, standing at the edge of this new era, she saw the cracks in that belief. Humanity had been hiding in plain sight, quietly building its strength, and now it was emerging with a force that couldn't be ignored. Jace had been the first to reveal this hidden power, but he was only the beginning. The galaxy was no longer the Vorelex's alone. It wasn't about domination anymore. The future lay in the balance between power and cooperation, between the old empires and the rising forces that had been buried in history. Humanity had the potential to reshape the galaxy, not through violence and control, but through resilience, adaptability, and unity. As Xyra looked at Jace, who had already begun forging connections, preparing for the challenges ahead, she knew one thing for certain: the galaxy would be forever changed. The true power of humanity was only just beginning to be understood. And with it, the galaxy's future was uncertain, full of potential, but fraught with challenges. Xyra no longer saw a weak human sitting quietly in the corner. She saw someone who could lead, someone who would make sure humanity's resurgence was not a threat, but a promise of a new way forward. The question was no longer what humanity would become, it was what the galaxy would choose to do with them. And Xyra, once a proud believer in her people's superiority, was now uncertain whether the Vorlex would be the ones who would shape the future, or if humanity would rise to take the lead. The galaxy would never be the same again, and neither would she.